on, we're going to get started.
Okay.
I'm Jim Milliken. I chair the Concord Historical Society. And here we are at our second Thursday program once again. And boy, have we been happy to do these. And the turnout is fantastic. I really appreciate y'all being here. I also like to mention once in a while, like every time, the Walk a Lecture series. I can't encourage you enough to pay attention what the Walk a Lecture series is offering in the community, and they help sponsor us as well. But their programs are just excellent. In fact, if there are several people right here in the audience who are part of that, which is fantastic. So tonight's program, well, one more thing. Next month, I'll tell you that now. It's going to be about the Concord Parks and Recreation Department in all the parks that we have in the community. And that will be the director, David Gill. Some of you may know David. And in fact, the city just christened, had a grand opening of a brand new park yesterday, last evening, in Penacook. And go up there and look at it. It's fantastic. The question I forgot to ask, and maybe somebody knows, can you fish the river from the park?
Do you have a license?
Can you?
Do you have a license?
Well,
I'm not 100%
Yes.
sure, but people do fish up there already before there was a park.
yeah, the Penacook River, oh boy, I shouldn't go. We ought to have a program on the Penacook River in the future. And there are enough people around. There used to be, I think, still an association of the Penacook River folks that live along the river and so forth. But boy, am I digressing. Glad you're all here. Rob and Sherry Morrill have a part of the Morrill family. The Morrill farm has been around for more than 100 years. And they've had a very unique relationship with the city. And I'm not going to take their thunder, but I'm hoping they'll tell you a little bit about the history of Concord and how farming has been important and how they are continuing to carry on some of that history right here in our own community as they do that. So please help me welcome Sherry and Rob Morrill.
That's good. You know, I always was told if they clap when you're introduced, they really want to be here. So I hope you clap when we're done too, because you enjoyed it. Anyway, I'm Rob, and my wife Sherry Morrill. We're actually the third generation of Morrills to farm in Penacook. Previous to that, it would have been my great-grandfather and his father, my grandfather and his father, excuse me, I was off a generation, and it may have been longer than that, but they moved and used to farm on Mountain Road, and it was 1925 when my grandfather, with a pair of horses, one cow, and various other, small animals, bought the original farm in Penacook, and moved to 31 Penacook Street, in Penacook, it's Concord, and that's where it's been. Now it has grown significantly, and that's Sherry. There's 13 different tax bills that encompasses the property today that we pay to the city of Concord, and one to the town of Bosquen. We have 125 plus or minus acres on Water Street, Long Street, and Bosquen that we farm. So from that one cow, a pair of horses, and various animals, today there's approximately 350 cattle, both dairy cattle and more recently in 2019, we started a retail beef business, and these are all beef crosses that are born on the farm that we raise for the beef market that we sell primarily either there at the farm or Sherry participates in the Concord Farmers Market every Saturday from May to the end of October. She's the guru, behind the counter on that business. Even though our youngest son was the one that kind of spearheaded getting it started and tending to it. But as I, from that standpoint, so we milk about 130 cows. Dairy cattle and milk has been part of the full 100 years in Penacook. We've always been diversified, but there's always been milk. Started with my grandfather selling milk, horsing a milk wagon in the village of Penacook. Approximately 1939, as close as we can see, is when he sold the milk route to Concord Dairy, which at that time, of course, they were in the corner of Rumford and Washington Street. And then in the early 50s, of course, Concord Dairy built the plant on North State Street, which through several different others, today we all know it as the Hood plant, but it was Concord. So from day one of that plant on North State Street, milk from our farm has been delivered there. I tell people I was old enough to go with my grandfather when the milk was delivered to the plant in cans. And if we were really good, we got an ice cream cone at the old dairy bar. So, and I remember the first bulk tank. When I make that statement, my oldest sister says she remembers going to the old plant on Washington Street. I know when I chatted with her, she was hoping to come over. She lives in Penacook. She was actually hoping to come over this evening, but she wasn't sure. So anyway, so that's just, a small tidbit, and I use that because it's very unique in the dairy industry. Both Sherry and myself have been involved in the dairy co-ops, and the longevity that our milk has gone to the same process and plant for so many years. Today it's picked up every day, I'm sure, here in town, because the fact the plant's here. You see the stainless steel tankers, DFA tankers. That's actually the milk co-op that we belong to, and they supply, through the contract, they're the ones that supply a lot of the milk to that Hood plant. But it goes right back to that transportation unit from the very first, bulk tank, when bulk tanks first came in to existence. We milk around 130 cows. I'm no longer directly involved in that side. I'm not the one that's in the barn at 3 o'clock in the morning anymore. And I was the one the majority of the time that did do that morning milking. Now, my two youngest sons, our youngest son is actually the herdsman of the farm, and his brother Kevin works very closely with him. We have 3 of our sons that are full-time, very active in the farm. 2 of them actually are part owners. One of them is very much an integral part of the farm. However, he has chosen, not to be a, actual owner at this time. So, as I say, 130, the current barn, and here again, I'm the one that remembers, I was there the first day that barn and that milking parlor was put into use. I remember actually milking cows. I was about 12, 13 years old when the new barn, I still refer to sometimes, In 1969, it was April 1970 when we started milking cows in that barn. I remember the stanchion barn, the basin barn. It got converted to a calf barn back then. We've learned a lot about animal health over the years. It was a dungeon, a pneumonia trap. I see our good friends of Moore's shaking their heads. They've been there too with their existence at some of the old facilities and what we've learned over the years. And essentially that's used as storage now. And the calves are actually raised in hutches and super hutches, and they kind of transition up through groups by size. So approximately at just shy of 2 years of age is when they have their first calf, and they go into the, milking herd. That's been probably been the main source of income. Definitely the most steady source of income, because we do get a milk check every 2 weeks. Whether it's always profitable or not, that we could debate here all night long, but at least, you know what, it's cash flow every 2 weeks. And that's huge. You can make payroll, you can, try to keep your accounts current. We've always been diversified. In the very early 40s, after my father got out of high school, he started a snow plowing business. Had a farm all age. The way I heard the story is, my grandfather was very meticulous about when it snowed out. The dooryard was always shoveled out. My father said there's got to be a better way than to do this and shoveling it. And he built a wooden snowplow on a tractor. And then one of the neighbors asked him about doing their driveway or one of the small businesses in the village. And that's how, our snowplowing business started. It's still very much a part of our farm in the winter months now, and we're still plowing snow with tractors. And essentially those tractors that we use plowing snow would be sitting in sheds over the winter. So we're again trying to utilize, equipment that we have, diversification. My father had a seed business. My grandfather actually for several years in the 50s into the early 60s, he owned what at that time was the Texaco station right there. At that time was Main Street in Penacook, and it's Village Street now. It changed hands. Actually, his key employee bought it from him and ran it. But people that are familiar with Penacook, it was the Texaco. Today, it's actually Village Street Garage is the name of it, today. So it's still, the garage is there, pretty much the garage that was there. I mean, I go in there and I see some of the old bricks and whatnot. I mean, we still patronize it today. So, we've always been diversified. Let's see. So, because it was John H. Morrill, my grandfather, and then the business, when my father came into it, was known as John H. Morrill and Son. That was a business name into 1975 when my grandfather passed away. And then it was, of course, owned by David Morrill, DBA Morrill Farm. That was my father in actually 1979. He split the business up, per se, and I had a brother that, excuse me, it's a monitor, the board, and I can't even shut that one off. It's a, notification. I've tried, believe me. anyway, in '79, he split the business. My brother at that time was a cow guy, you know, and that was his interest. So my brother actually purchased the dairy herd from my father, and it was run as a, what we call term of a feed purchase operation. My father still did all the crop work and essentially sold the crops to my brother. And then in 1988, 89 is when essentially my brother was, you know, he was
He's
sick,
done.
done,
He was done.
I guess, of the dairy. You know, he was gonna sell sell out, and we were young. We'd actually been working for my father. I came back from college after a couple of years of doing, 5 years I was gone from the farm after high school. Other jobs, you know, I was out in New York State. I'd come back, was working with him. We purchased the cows. We actually ran it as a feed purchase, you know, working with my father, but he still owned the crop, you know, side of the business. We owned the dairy. We owned the cattle. And that was in 1989, and then in 1994, my father retired, and it all became back to one business again. At that time, both the dairy and the crops, we took that side of the business over, and, you know, that's what the business in 2012, when our sons, you know, were there, our oldest son particularly, it was like, you know, we have to do something. They were looking at ideas and whatnot, and that's when we formed, as it's known today, Morrill Farm Dairy LLC, and they came in as partners. And gradually, actually between Sherry and I today, I guess we own 50%. But yeah, we could get outvoted, I guess, if they wanted to do things. I mean, you know, the way it's set up, that's strictly the business side of it. All the land is in a trust. So, you know, separate from the business. So when they came in, we had quite an expansion project. We leased a second facility in the western part of the state that became available. We were running with the idea that we were gonna build a facility, you know, here, put it all back together, but they would have built their cattle inventory. Number crunching and putting it all together, it actually became, in the markets, it wasn't gonna be economically feasible to do what, you know, we thought, you know, what the plan was. Changed that plan. We were looking at some other dairy expansions and whatnot, and we had some issues that took place. I guess I'll just leave it. We had a new abutter that didn't think there should be a dairy expansion. It ought to be the quaint dairy farm that they saw there, you know, even when they purchased it, and it was only a few years before that. We went through a lot of hoops. They lost, we won. 2020 showed up. That changed the whole economics of doing what we were gonna do. Rolled the son at that point, he pretty much threw his hands up. I picture this to this day. I'm really tired of how dairy's going. As much as we wanna be dairy, but the markets, co-ops, endpoint, I've gotta tend to the things that I'm really interested in, and he's the one that's the mechanic, the business side, he's the crop girl. He was looking, and so that's and when he got involved with growing the small grains, trying to grow barley and wheat and winter rye, and selling it to the malt market for these craft breweries and everything. Believe me, it's been a learning curve, but he's done well. but we're still very dependent on the crops. He's developed quite a business. I think since 2019, there's 5 grain bins that have been built since then. So there's been a significant, infrastructure expense put into this, but the potential's there, plus it's not dedicated to one, specific. Well, milk, dairy, it's very dedicated, all the equipment he's got. So now we're growing grain, we're actually back to, when I was a kid even, I remember my father growing a lot of our own grain and we ground it, and guess what, we're doing the exact same thing now to a portion. Not just silage corn, there used to be a very good market for silage corn where you use the whole plant. My father and we did too for many years, sold a lot of corn silage to other farms that didn't, have enough ground, for their own animals. Thing is, a lot of those other farms have disappeared today or more. That market is gone. I mean, we had a farm east of us that we sold them, it got to the fact, we sold them the majority of all their corn silage for just under 30 years, from when my father started it until the day that they sold their cows. But there wasn't, in their case, there wasn't another generation, to come in. My wife and I have been very fortunate that way. We had 4 children, 3 boys and a girl. All 4 of them are involved in the dairy industry. 3 of them, the 3 boys are at the home farm. Our daughter actually married a dairy farmer, but she went to school and PhD, and maybe my wife can say it, but she's got a title that's that long. She works for a global agricultural firm, at this time, but a dairy farmer too, so I call that one of my biggest blessings, that our children followed the footsteps, and it was all by their choice, because we made them, or we told them, you weren't just staying here, you're doing something else, and they all came back. So, today, we're, here again, it's the diversification, the meat, the milk, dairy cattle, I've had a passion since I was a kid, in 4-H, showing cattle. I've always had a passion in pedigrees and marketing, and one of the things that I guess Sherry and I, our generation, I'd like to feel particularly, and I'm fortunate that our youngest son particularly has that same passion. All of the kids do. But is we've developed a very prominent herd of cattle. We've shown, actually, last fall, we were fortunate enough, Ryan, our youngest son, and myself, with a couple other people from friends of ours that are in the business, and we took a group of cattle to Toronto, Canada, to the Canadian Royal Winter Fair in November. And it's, wasn't on a bucket list, but when we did it, I said, that's a bucket list event. I mean, we'd been there and visit, to the show before as spectators. But, to participate in that show was pretty awesome. I mean, we've participated in World Dairy Expo. We've marketed cattle and genetics, essentially internationally. And we've got a lot of friends throughout the country and, particularly Canada. So that's kind of one of our things. I'm gonna let Sherry speak for a minute. I mean, she's been very involved. I feel like I'm doing all the talking, but believe me, it's been a team.
We're going to throw your phone out in the car to start with.
Yeah, well, it's sensitive.
So, I'll kind of do the Vanna White thing
Okay.
here. I gotta get up. So Rob talked early on about family and where we came from. So prior to the farm anniversary party back in July, I had asked one of Rob's sisters to help me out with some pictures.
They hold those.
And the funny part was we got pictures of what would be Rob's great-great-grandfather, and the picture of his wife said Mrs. David Morrill. And in the next generation, we had Albert Morrill and Mrs. Albert Morrill. And I was like, okay, if I learn, no, nothing else, these ladies had first names. We're going to find them out. It took a little research, but we found Susan and we found Rose, and so these were further back. And actually, the Morrill family can trace their roots back to two brothers that came over on the Mayflower, which I don't know if it's such a good thing, because the more we find out about these early people who came out of the over on the Mayflower, they were emptying out the prisons over there in England. So, you know, there's days when I kind of wonder. My boys make me wonder sometimes. You know, I always say at the end of the day, if nobody's died, nobody's gone to jail. It's been a good day. So we had David and Albert. They farmed in Canterbury and up on Mountain Road, up near where the country club is now. So that is where, these are smaller pictures. So Rob's grandfather, John Morrill, who purchased the farm in Penacook in 1925. And when I started looking back, I found out what he came over with animals, but there was only 70 acres. And he continued to buy small pieces of land all around that abutted the farmstead itself. Some of the land was actually owned by an ice company out of Boston. They would harvest ice there on the ponds and load it onto the rail cars and take it to Boston. So that was some of the land that was purchased through that. There's, you know, lowland, nice farmland, there's woodlot, whatever. A lot of land was cleared over the years. Then later down the road, we've got a picture of Rob's father, David Morrill, and his wife, Edwina, and everybody knew her as Winna. And she wasn't very tall. She was barely 5 feet, but she ran. She was in charge. If you ask David who was in charge, she was in charge. I learned a lot from her, and I hope I can pass.
Believe me, I know.
I hope I can pass a lot of what I learned down to my daughter-in-laws. But that's kind of the background of the family, as land was picked up around Penacook. But we got into the 1930s, and if some of you are familiar and you've heard the stories about the hurricanes that came up the coast and the floods of 36 and 38, well, John had about had it with the floods, and he decided he needed some higher ground. So he went on a mission, and he ended up in Boscawen on the corner of Water and Long Street up there. And what's there? How many acres up there?
125.
About 125
acres up there on
So
that.
a lot of it, I mean, there was pasture land, there was woodlot, there's fields for
an old
hay and
orchard.
corn. There was a lot of it's changed over the years, but the biggest change was a few years back when Rob and I made the choice to put a conservation easement on that land. It's with the Society for the Protection of New Hampshire Forests. So that was a good thing, so it will always be preserved, and we actively farm it.
I'm not sure. Actually, I don't think there's any pictures here today.
So after we, along with that land up in Boscawen, it allowed Rob's father and mother, Dave and Winna had 6 children. There were 4 girls and 2 boys. The girls all worked. they all worked on the farm. Rob's oldest sister, Ellen, will tell you her favorite memory is her birthday in June on the 28th, because they had a picnic and birthday cake up in Boscawen. They were always haying up there, and that was her favorite memory of birthday up there. But they needed, more land was needed, and John Morrill entered into an agreement with Mrs. Woodman down here on North Main Street, and Mrs. Woodman was a walker prior to being married. And the family wanted, they weren't using the farmland anymore to its full abilities. So John Morrill and David entered into an agreement in the early 1940s with Mrs. Woodman.
1948.
Yeah, with Mrs. Woodman. And the family kept that lease agreement until we purchased the land. Timmy Woodman, this is her son, came to us one day and said, you know, I think it's about time to make a change to the lease. And he wanted to sell the land. And that was what, 25?
2001.
2000.
Well, in 1996,
Yeah.
Timmy said, I'm gonna sell
Yeah.
the house and the dooryard. And for the folks sitting here, you've driven by it many times. It's right on the very end here of North Main Street.
The brown house with the two
It's the
big
brown
barns.
house and the two barns, right on the very end. Actually, the house just south of that, which is a gray house, was the farmhouse of the Walker family. And Timothy Walker was the very first minister in Concord in the settler days. So we were the first people to own that property. I mean, the original farmhouse had been sold in the 80s. Actually, it was after Mrs. Woodman passed in taking care of her estate. Then, because Timothy owned the rest of the property. The house lot, as he always called it, the south side of the old road. And then the farmland is the north side. Actually, they donated the land where the Pierce Manse sits was actually part of their property prior to that being moved, and they were the ones that donated it for when they moved the Pierce Manse there. So from that point to the Merrimack River, all the farmland, you may say the inside of Horseshoe Pond. A lot of times it's referred to as the island of Horseshoe Pond. But in 2001, when we purchased the house and the barns in 96,
Yeah.
we more or less looked at each other and says, we're gonna live there someday, but our kids were growing up. We were so active, you know, they were in schools and whatnot, but essentially in 2007 or 8, Ryan was just getting out of school. It's when we moved down here to Concord ourselves. So we've actually lived here, the two of us. Then in 2001 is when we purchased the farmland. And I tell the story about standing out on the sidewalk, Main Street, in front of the old Orr and Reno, right across from the State House. And we came out after signing all the paperwork, and Timmy said, oh, wait a second, I've got something for you. And he went to his car and he retrieved a box of artifacts, maps, and different. There was actually a diary of the farm, which now sits in the state library. Some of his family descendants from the family were very upset that he gave that away. And anyway, it was no problem to us. But it was enjoyable having that and reading through it. You know, 6 bushels of potatoes on the details record details that they kept back in, those days. But I said to Timmy when he handed that to me, and I says, Timmy, I think that 5-year lease that you signed with my father and grandfather just expired. But he was a gentleman, have a great respect for him to this day.
That's a nice
He
part.
had the foresight, and it was one of the very first conservation easements of agricultural land. And
That the Forest Society did, yeah.
Timothy Woodman donated the easement. So that land will always be agricultural land. His easement written, it's gotta be agricultural land. And I don't know whether anybody's ever noticed it, but right at the corner as you turn down there, there is a stone, marker stating the donated conservation easement, on that property. I didn't mean to take you off.
I lost my train of thought.
It is when he mentioned the history of Concord, I think he was referring to that.
Yeah.
Because it very much is, and as I mentioned, we've been involved with a lot of organizations throughout the country, and of course now with social media and posts and seeing. And I can remember even growing up, my father was in the seed business, one of the seed companies, going out in the fields out there and taking photos, because when you're working those fields, there's areas of those fields where you look across and you have the Capitol Dome in the background. And I've taken several photos now today, you got this little thing in your pocket, and have posted them, when you're harvesting, and it's unique. And the state of New Hampshire is not necessarily known as a corn state, like the big states of Iowa and Illinois, the I states, as they call them, the corn growers call them. Yet we do have something here in New Hampshire that they don't have. We have the closest cornfields to a state capital of any state in the nation. No.
Will you finish? No.
Somebody have a question?
No.
Oh, no, and you know what? Feel free if you've got a question, either one of us. Yeah.
That's all the original plots of land for the original settlers.
Right.
But yeah, there's a small tract that was added. We actually have a map that was, scrolled. But yet, Jerry took it down to Rollins a few years ago, and they matted it. And it actually had the blueprint and whatnot, and they were just thoroughly amazed at the historical map. Even the blueprints with it, this is part of the artifacts that we've had. She's had it, whatever they do, preserved and whatnot, that hangs up in our house, and it's, a plan of the Walker farm.
I believe you also own the road, where the train.
That is absolutely correct. And Counselor, I use that once in a while. And that was closed. We actually, in that box of artifacts, is the minutes to the city council meeting that they closed that road, and it stated reverted back to the landowners with a 5-foot pedestrian right-of-way.
We're not so bad.
There are some rules about guards and buys, or whatever I try to say, where you can only allow, or you cannot allow people to use part of that road, or it might reverse back to different ownership.
The utilities have right-of-ways.
And the train.
Well, the railroad,
Don't even go there.
we're not even going there tonight. And I think Council knows why. But the the farmland is all under a conservation easement. As I say, it's the northern half of the road, because as he mentioned the road, you know, the abutters own to the middle when they revert back. So the complete northern half of that closed road, we own. Up where the house lot is, because that was a different lot, we own that. So we do own both sides of the road at one point. But yeah, and I think we can leave that right there. But anyway, no, it is, and that's been an integral part of Morrill Farm since 1948, that property. And, you know, it's been, realistically, it's an integral part of the city of Concord's history, without question, and it's gonna stay that way. We get phone calls or messages now about, hey, you know, what about that open piece of land, you know, that undeveloped land you own? Now, you haven't read the deeds. No, it's more important to be growing food on it than anything else. So as far as that goes, yes, it's always gonna be farmland there. It's always open space. And there's lots of challenges farming within a municipality. As I mentioned, when I send some of those pictures, you know, and some of my friends, and I have a very close friend that I got to know, and her family had farmed, and she grew up in Massachusetts, and, you know, it's no longer farmed there. She and her husband have just retired, but they had a farm in central New York State, and she says, I'll never ever farm in an area where I'm in municipality like that. How can you stand it again? You know, after, you know, and I get it, it's different, for sure, but it is home. That's part of where, you know, our boys, you know, with what a big glue was, this is home. You know, I mean, in all reality, sometimes you gotta wonder why they wanna be here other than it's home. Because for agricultural, and particularly like dairy, it's not ideal. I mean, our infrastructure's gone. We actually do a lot of our business with suppliers out of state today. Because we don't have them, or even, you know, everybody's familiar with equipment dealers. The ones that are local, they can sell you lawn and garden equipment and, you know, backyard hobby equipment. And you drive by these places, and what do you see on their lots? Well, that's what they sell. You know, we understand it, and we've got to go, you know, we're very fortunate in the aspect that our oldest son is a tremendous mechanic. We do a lot of our repairs in-house, as most farms do, what they can, because you have to. You know, but we do a lot. Tremendous, I mean, and there's firms that, you know, we do a lot of business with, and even locally, they don't have the supplies, so UPS, you get it the next day anyway, you know, if you have to, so, but those are some of the challenges. You just don't run, you know, I mean, you do sometimes, but you're going an hour to 2 hours. I mean, the other day, you know, a dealership in Plainfield had some parts that, you know, we needed, but you're over an hour each way, but it was worth it. Yes, ma'am.
So I read about that with the fixing your equipment and things, and that computers have been a problem because of all the things that, like, dealers will say, well, you gotta do it this way, and can you talk a little bit about that, or are you fortunate enough to have things that you can work on?
You know, it's interesting you bring it up, because next week, our harvest woman, Maggie Goodlander. They've got her on a tour, and she's gonna be at the farm, and that's one of the topics that she's asked about. And I says, well, we're fortunate, our oldest son, is a very good mechanic, very capable. He'll actually go on to computers and YouTube and all of that. I'm not, I'm the other extreme. But yes, it's a serious issue. But I said, you know, to us, a new piece of equipment is probably 20 years old anyway. I mean, we do have some newer equipment, but the age, and the electronics, and he's gone way beyond I ever. I mean, we actually do have a tractor with GPS auto steering that, I mean, he actually put it in it. I mean, he bought it. Yeah, we use GPS in the field. It's you go gulp as the old guy at what it's costing you, but after you've had it, you realize what it's saving you, particularly on chemicals and fertilizer, because you only have to overlap a little bit. You know, even though you're thinking you're not, well, you got double coverage. So I can attest after a few years that finally pays for itself. You know, agriculture, the industry, you can't wait 2 weeks when it's harvest time for a service, you know, that they're bought. And that's the issue of this. It's called right to repair legislations. That, you know, it's different. And that's about the extent I know about it, other than the fact that it's real serious problem, particularly in the areas where they have the combine fleets of harvest and you know, even the harvesting equipment and the changes over the years. I can remember one row corn chopper. Actually, the first one I actually remember is it had its own motor on it, and my father sat on a farm all H, one row at a time, chopping corn into a truck. Then we went to a 2-row, you know, PTO, many years. Back in around 2012, we're looking at time and whatnot. We're fortunate in this area, there were a couple of people that were starting custom harvest business, particularly chopping, you know, corn. And we talked with one of them, and essentially since 2012, that fella has a 12-row chopper. What used to take us all fall now, we harvest in about 3 days. But it's amazing the other things we can do and the efficiency, and when you get all, you go gulp when you cut him his check. But when you break it down as to the cost per ton of that feed that went in the silo, it's pretty cheap. We couldn't do it ourselves, in all reality. He's the one that's got to pay that breakdown, that $10,000, because he had a breakdown, and that's what it costs to, you know, for the parts that he needs or whatever it is. So, you know, they've escalated also.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How many workers does it take to maintain all this?
How many workers?
Yeah, any of them illegals?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
No. No. We had, so actually, we had a fella, when we were in Allstead for like 5 years, when we had a second operation over there, our middle son, Kevin, went over there to run the operation, and we had 5 Guatemalans working for us. And when they came to work for us, they had to have their ID, they had to have all of their paperwork, and you had to sit there and fill out their I-9 form with them. Unfortunately, they would hand you an ID and 4 more would fall out of their wallet.
But were they good workers?
They were good, you know what, they were good workers. And they were here, they wanted to work because they could come to this country and work here for 5 to 10 years. They would send money every week. Somebody had to take them grocery shopping and to Western Union, and they would send money back to their family in Guatemala. And if they could get 10 years of work time here, they could go home and basically retire and live very well. And I asked one time, I asked one of the fellows, I said, if you get home and your wife has spent all this money, what do you do? And he basically said, she will be in jail. Because this is the
He may
agreement.
not have said it that
Not quite as politely, but they would do this, but.
He may be in jail
They
too.
were here, you know what? They were here because they wanted to be here, they wanted to work. They want to work 6 and 7 days a week. They want to work those 10 and 12-hour days because it keeps them busy. They are constructive, they're doing something where they're earning their money, and they're not out just wandering around. People in this country, people are horrified about the fact that if they have to work more than 8 hours a day. But these guys, and that's how we think here in the US.
We actually had
they want to work.
issues
If you
because
don't
they
let them
weren't
work,
getting enough hours.
worse. They would go, if you didn't give them more hours, they would say, fine, then I'm going to the farm across the river because he's going to pay me 50 cents an hour more, and I can work all the hours I want. So, I mean, they gave you the paperwork, you fill it out to the best of your ability. We're not trained. Nobody from immigration comes to the farmer and says, this is a legitimate piece of paperwork.
I'm not faulting you, but
No. But no, you have,
I don't think the average American wants to work like that.
no, they don't. No, they don't. So, they were great. We have kept
we
in
had
touch.
issues.
We had issues. I mean, it wasn't perfect. We had issues. But you know what? For the most part,
They
they were
knew
here.
there was
They
zero
did their job.
tolerance, and I mean,
Yeah,
It
some
was.
of them got escorted off, but all you got to do is say to the other guy, the other guys will say, I got a cousin, I got a friend, I got a brother, and you know what? The next day they would show up and they'd show you whatever, and it's like, that looks good to me,
and realistically, by law, we've got to accept what they give us.
Yes,
We cannot question as long as they've shown it, we've got copies of it.
yeah. But right now,
We're covered.
we do not have, right now, it's our 3 sons. We have a young lady who works for us who is 21 years old. She is in the barn, she milks mornings, she does calf chores,
It's all mechanical milking.
Right, but you have to be in the parlor, wiping
Yeah, moving
cows, putting
cows.
machines on and off, whatever. So the 3 boys, we have Phoebe, Mariah, who is there about 4 afternoons a week to feed calves. We have a grandson who is 14, he's there. I still feed calves 2 mornings of milk a week and milk on Sunday nights. And we have seasonal help, just with harvest and stuff. Actually, we have a fella here tonight, Scott Toll, and Scott has worked for Rob and I. He worked for Rob's father. And did he work for your grand?
Well, he actually worked for my father, but my grandfather was still there.
Scott
working, but Scott was a teenager that grew up in Penacook.
Yeah, so a lot of teenagers who grew up in Penacook worked at the farm.
At that time you had a lot, and actually Scott's younger brother also did it. That's the way it used to be. There'd be a family, and as long as we're talking about them, but Scott did it. His younger brother's gonna say, well, by God, my brother did it, I'm gonna do it.
Yeah,
He wasn't gonna get shown up by the older one, and
but it's always, there's always been
it
hired help.
has been, now that has changed.
Yeah, I mean, our kids, our children grew up working on, Rob and his brother and sisters grew up working on the farm. Our kids grew up working on the farm. I mean, people would say, well, did your daughter work on the farm? Oh, yeah. I mean, she was right there with the boys every step of the way, and, you know, they all worked on the farm because they wanted to. It was family. They wanted to be there. It's what we did. Our two oldest were 6 and 8, I believe, about 6 and 8 when we bought the cows from his brother. So our next,
And Kevin was just a baby.
Kevin,
He was born in June, and
yeah,
we
Kevin
bought
was
the
born in
cows
June,
January.
and Kevin made his first trip to the barn when he was 6 months old, and he will tell you he's probably been to the barn every day of his life since. And that is where he likes to be. And our youngest son, Ryan, as I did chores through my whole pregnancy with Ryan, and finally just one day said, that's it, I'm done, because if I don't walk out of the barn now, he's going to be born here. But it was a few weeks later, and we were back doing chores, and you know what, the kids all, like, I was still part of that generation where moms were on the farm. I gave up a job at a local bank to stay home and raise the kids and work on the farm. It was a choice that I made to stay home and be there with the kids. And I have a lot of friends of my generation that's what they did. They chose. But now there's a whole generation now, and I understand it for my sons. Their wives all have jobs off the farm because the cost of living today, there's just not enough there. But, you know, I chose to work on the farm. Our Larry and Melissa Moore, dear friends of ours. Melissa did some other stuff too, but she was on the farm, and she still is. And it's kind of the nice part about the farm too, is that we have generational friends. Larry and Melissa are, you know, for us, our friends, but Rob's parents.
We got to know them because we were all involved in young farmers.
Yeah. Oh, now we're all farmers. But it is, that's the other piece of the farm that people don't realize, is that there's all this stuff that goes on, but we rely so much on each other, our fellow farmers, for, you know, just support. You know, we're there for each other when there's an emergency, when there's a fire, when somebody needs to borrow a piece of equipment, but it's those generational friends that we really hang on to.
Yeah.
I don't have a question, I just want to make a comment. I would like to thank the Morrills and the Morrills for doing what you do, because I could not do it. I know that I could not do it. And I also personally know that Mrs. Moore and Mrs. Morrill were volunteers for the schools too, because I did bake sales with you.
Yes, and parent-teacher groups.
And so I want to thank you guys, because what you're doing is not an easy job, and just know that it's appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you.
I believe there was a fellow that had
I guess, I can't help but wonder what, I know this is hard, but what you see as the future holding for dairy farming in New Hampshire.
So, talk about beef.
What is the future of dairy farming?
The next generation? And in all reality, it's changing. It has changed immensely. But you know, you've got to have a passion to be in a dairy farmer for the dairy industry. Because one of the things about dairy farming is 300, cows have to be milked every day, 365 days a year. I mean, other livestock, we have other livestock too. We have to take care of them every day, but, you know, the actual, you know, you've got to milk cows. Now, robots, and we have one right here in Bosquen, a farm that has 2 robots that milks the cows, you know, that they put in a couple years ago. If I was building a facility, they're tremendous.
Yeah.
They're expensive. I mean, we were looking at that very intensely when we were looking at that expansion. That's not the only necessary. You've got to have somebody that has that passion and desire to be in the dairy industry. It's efficiency. I mean, there's a place for the niche dairies, just like any niche business. You know, there is a place for it, but in all reality is, you've got to be in an area, as I mentioned, we don't have the infrastructure. We don't have the land base to grow, to have necessarily the infrastructure to be just a dairy farm. Even the difference we noticed when we were in, it was Allstead, but the Connecticut River Valley, we weren't on a valley farm, but in that area where there are farms that milk, 500 cows or more. Now some of those farms are over 1,000 cows because they've kept expanding. You have that, as the industry said, you had that I-91 corridor over that way. So that the service was coming out of, or, Connecticut, but they were there almost instantly. We don't have that over here in the central part of the state, or Massachusetts, or, into Maine, whereas they could run I-91 from Connecticut all the way up through, Vermont. And you get that. So this particular area, it's got to be somebody within a family or business that's got that passion to be in the dairy industry. We're fortunate, we still have some farms where the next generation, such as our case, there are 3 or 4 farms right here locally that next generation does have the passion. They are in the dairy. They're making, changes to their business so they can stay in the dairy business. How long is that going to be? Well, either they get tired or their next generation doesn't do it. I have made the comment myself. I feel our farm is set for the future, but it's going to be different. But it's got to be what that next generation wants to do. The only thing that's constant is change.
One last question. Oh, I don't get it.
Well,
Huh? Yes.
I just think that you should make sure you mention your beef that you're raising. I took a brochure because I'm going to see what mine's up for my freezer. So,
Good advertising.
yeah.
Come see me
Thank you.
Saturday at the market.
Does your beef come from cows that no longer produce milk?
No.
No. Actually, when they first started, we did a few animals that either, they were young cows that, didn't get bred back, or a young heifer that didn't get bred. And we started breeding some of the cattle, our dairy cattle, to what we call a beef cross. So like Angus, primarily most of them are Angus Holstein crosses. So you get that crossbred calf that's born, and it's raised. We primarily raise them right with all of our young stock up until they get to the point that we call finishing them, getting them ready, but it's all on our own, forages, grains, our own feed, our own care. They're born at the farm. They're processed at a local butcher over here in Barnstead that's USDA inspected, which we have to sell the individual cuts as we do. There is a brochure. It is a little bit about the farm on it also. This afternoon, Thursday afternoons is the day, Thursdays and Saturdays at the farm. They have hours, so Sherry was selling meat until 5 o'clock, 5:30, and then, came down here. And then, as I said, from 1st of May to end of October, She goes to the farmer's market pretty much every Saturday morning. And the majority of the time, one of our grandsons for the last couple of years has gone with her and really enjoys it. He actually happened to be out with his dad. They left yesterday and they're playing for a few days. They've gone to Ohio to the big tractor pull that's out in Bowling Green, Ohio.
Larry's like, what?
Wow, what a gift this has been, huh?
Well, feel free to look at the photos. I mean,
I got one more thing. Go ahead. Next month, when Dave Gill is here, he's asked that I ask you if you've got any history or photographs or anything of your relationship with the local, I just forgot the word. Parks. Thank you. Please bring them in, because it's going to be somewhat like this, some discussion. And we're going to get the history up to about 1938 with the hurricanes, which had a tremendous impact on our parks. And in the future, we're going to have another update on what's going on in the park. So please be sure to come the second Thursday next month. And again, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.